The crystal palace of Zephyria shook once again as another ear-splitting shriek echoed through its magnificent halls. Empress Lyralii pressed her delicate fingers against her temples, her silver skin glowing with stress patterns that rippled like disturbed water. The sound came from the royal nursery, where her twin daughters were having what the palace staff had begun calling another episode. At 18 months old, Princess Vera and Princess Kara were not ordinary children. Born of the ancient Zephyrian bloodline, they possessed abilities that even adult members of their species struggled to control. When the twins were upset, which seemed to be constantly these days, their combined psychic energy could shatter reinforced crystal, send furniture flying across rooms, and create electromagnetic pulses that disabled the palace's most advanced technology. "Your Majesty," came a trembling voice from behind her. Councillor Thane, the palace's head administrator, approached with obvious reluctance. His usual composed demeanor had cracked weeks ago under the stress of managing what everyone privately referred to as the situation. The 27th nanny has submitted her resignation. She lasted 3 hours longer than the previous record holder. Lyralii didn't turn around. Through the massive windows of her throne room, she could see the capital city of New Olympia stretching toward the horizon. Her people were growing restless. The constant disruptions from the palace had begun affecting the city's power grid, and reports of minor earthquakes were becoming daily occurrences. The twins' uncontrolled abilities were not just a family problem anymore, they were becoming a threat to the stability of the entire empire. What did she say in her report? The Empress asked, though she already knew it would be similar to all the others. Thane cleared his throat nervously. She mentioned something about demonic energy signatures and psychic attacks that felt like being struck by lightning. The medical team had to sedate her before she could complete her statement. Another crash echoed from the nursery, followed by the sound of what might have been an entire wall being reduced to rubble. Emergency alarms began blaring throughout the palace as automated systems detected yet another structural breach. Lyralii closed her eyes and felt the familiar weight of helplessness settle on her shoulders. Since her husband's death in the war against the hegemony 6 months ago, the twins had grown increasingly difficult to manage. It was as if they sensed the absence of their father and responded with a fury that defied all logic and reason. Traditional Zephyrian child-rearing techniques had proven useless. The most experienced caregivers in the galaxy had fled in terror. Even the war-hardened soldiers of her personal guard had requested transfers to active combat zones rather than face another shift near the nursery. "Your Majesty," Thane continued carefully, "the Council of Ministers is requesting another emergency session. There are concerns being raised about the succession." Lyralii's eyes snapped open, the silver irises flashing with dangerous light. "What kind of concerns?" "Some are suggesting that children with such uncontrolled abilities might not be suitable heirs to the throne. There's talk of invoking the stability clause and naming your sister as regent until the princesses come of age and prove they can manage their powers." The Empress turned slowly, and Thane took an involuntary step backward. When Lyralii was angry, the air around her seemed to shimmer with barely contained energy. "My sister, who has been conspicuously absent during this crisis. My sister, who has been holding private meetings with the military commanders while I struggle to care for my children." "Your Majesty, I only report what I hear. I know exactly what you hear, Thane. And I know exactly what my dear sister is planning." Lyralii moved toward the throne room's balcony, her flowing robes trailing behind her like liquid starlight. "But she underestimates both me and my daughters. These children are not broken, they're powerful beyond measure. They simply need the right kind of guidance." As if summoned by their mother's words, another explosion rocked the palace. This one was different, stronger, more focused. The lights flickered and went out completely for several seconds before the emergency power systems kicked in. In the distance, car alarms began wailing throughout the capital as the electromagnetic pulse reached the city. "Your Majesty," came a new voice from the throne room entrance. Captain Zara of the Royal Guard stood at attention, her usually pristine uniform singed and her silver hair disheveled. "We've had another incident. The princesses, they've somehow managed to breach the reinforced containment barriers. The entire east wing of the nursery has been, well, it's gone." "Gone?" Lyralii repeated. "Completely vaporized, ma'am. We're not entirely sure how they accomplished it, but the energy readings suggest they somehow synchronized their abilities for the first time. The combined power signature was. Captain Zara paused, clearly struggling to find appropriate words. It was beyond anything our sensors can measure. Lyralii felt her heart sink even further. If the twins were beginning to coordinate their abilities, the situation had just become exponentially more dangerous. Individually, each child possessed the psychic equivalent of a small nuclear reactor. Combined and focused, they could potentially level entire city blocks. Casualties? She asked quietly. Miraculously, none. The twins seemed to have some instinctive control over their targeting. The destruction was limited to inanimate objects and structural elements. But, Your Majesty. Captain Zara hesitated. If they continue to grow stronger at this rate, and if they begin coordinating their abilities regularly, we may need to consider more dramatic containment measures. The Empress knew what that meant. The royal guard was preparing to treat her children like enemy combatants. Absolutely not, she said firmly. They are babies, not weapons. There has to be another solution. Councillor Thane stepped forward hesitantly. Your Majesty, there is one possibility we haven't explored. The Galactic Child Care Services database has records of caregivers from every known species in the galaxy. Perhaps we've been too focused on traditional Zephyrian approaches. We've already tried Mentari empaths, Corvani pacification specialists, and even a Zenthri monk who claimed to be able to commune with infant minds, Lyralii replied. What could possibly be different? Well, Thane said, pulling up a holographic display from his wrist communicator, there are several species we haven't considered. The database shows some promising candidates from less conventional backgrounds. The hologram showed a list of available caregivers, sorted by species, experience, and success rates with difficult cases. Most of the entries were familiar, the usual suspects from advanced civilizations with long traditions of childcare and education. But, near the bottom of the list, Lyralii noticed an entry that stood out. Human, she read aloud. I've never heard of this species. They're relatively new to galactic society, Thane explained. Only made contact about 50 years ago. Their homeworld is called Earth, located in what they call the Sol system. According to the database, they're classified as a pre-warp civilization that somehow managed to develop faster than light travel through unconventional means. Lyralii studied the entry more carefully. The human candidate's profile was unusual, to say the least. Unlike the extensive credentials and certifications that typically filled such listings, this one was remarkably simple. The candidate's name was listed as Marcus Chen, and his qualifications were listed as father of 3, specializes in high-energy children, unconventional methods. 3 children? Lyralii mused. That's hardly impressive compared to the Corvani specialist who had managed over 300 difficult cases. True, Your Majesty, but look at his success rate, Thane pointed out. It's listed as 100%. No failed placements, no early terminations, no requests for hazard pay supplements. Captain Zara leaned in to examine the profile. That could simply mean he's never faced truly challenging cases. Managing human children can't possibly compare to dealing with psychically gifted Zephyrian royalty. Perhaps not, Lyralii admitted, but, at this point, what do we have to lose? Every other option has failed spectacularly. Another distant crash reminded them all of the urgency of their situation. This time, the sound was accompanied by what distinctly resembled children's laughter, high, delighted giggles that somehow made the destruction seem even more ominous. The twins are enjoying themselves, Captain Zara observed grimly. That's not encouraging. Lyralii made her decision. Contact this Marcus Chen immediately. Offer him standard compensation plus hazard pay bonuses. If he can travel here within the week, we'll give him a trial period. Your Majesty, Councillor Thane said carefully, are you certain about this? Bringing an unknown alien into the palace, giving him access to the royal heirs, the security implications alone, the security implications of my daughters accidentally destroying the capital city are far greater, Lyralii interrupted. Besides, what could one human possibly do that our own people haven't already tried? As if in response to her question, the palace shook again. This time, the tremor was followed by the sound of massive structural supports giving way somewhere in the east wing. Emergency sirens began wailing as automated systems detected what the computers classified as seismic activity of unknown origin. "Send the message," Lyrelii commanded. "Tell this Marcus Chen that the Zephyrian Empire has need of his services. And mention that the compensation package includes full health coverage, combat pay rates, and a guaranteed evacuation shuttle on standby." "Combat pay rates?" Captain Zara questioned. "Captain, have you seen what happened to the last 27 caregivers? We're asking this human to walk into what amounts to an active war zone. The least we can do is pay him accordingly." As Thane began composing the emergency message to Earth, Lyrelii returned to her vigil at the window. In the distance, she could see ships beginning to leave the orbital stations, wealthy families and government officials who had decided that proximity to the capital was no longer worth the risk. Her empire, built over centuries of careful diplomacy and military strength, was being torn apart by two toddlers who missed their father. The message to Marcus Chen was simple and direct: emergency childcare position available. Immediate travel required. Extremely high compensation. Situation urgent. Attached to the message were the basic details about the twins, though the description of their abilities had been significantly downplayed to avoid scaring away their potential savior before he even arrived. What the message didn't mention was that Marcus Chen would be walking into a situation that had already been declared a potential planetary emergency by the Zephyrian High Command. It didn't mention that the previous caregivers had included some of the most respected child development experts in the galaxy. And it certainly didn't mention that the twins' latest trick involved creating miniature black holes that lasted for several seconds before destabilizing. As the message traveled through the galactic communication network toward the small blue planet called Earth, Empress Lyrelii could only hope that this mysterious human would prove to be different from all the others. Because if Marcus Chen failed, she would be faced with a choice no mother should ever have to make: the safety of her children, or the safety of her empire. In the nursery, now little more than a crater surrounded by twisted metal and crystalline debris, Princess Vera and Princess Kara sat amidst the destruction, clapping their hands and gurgling with delight. To them, the chaos was simply a game, and they were winning. Marcus Chen had been having what he privately called one of those weeks when the message arrived. His 3-year-old daughter Emma had decided that Tuesday was the perfect day to flood the bathroom by turning the sink into what she called a swimming pool for my toys. His 5-year-old son Jake had somehow managed to get his head stuck between the stair railings while attempting what he described as ninja training. And his 8-year-old daughter Lisa had been suspended from school for organizing what the principal termed an underground rebellion against assigned seating in the cafeteria. Marcus was a single father, had been for 2 years now since his wife Sarah passed away from cancer. He'd learned to handle the controlled chaos that seemed to follow his children everywhere they went. But nothing in his experience had prepared him for the message that appeared on his communication device that Wednesday evening. The message claimed to be from something called the Zephyrian Empire and offered him a childcare position with compensation that seemed to have several extra zeros attached to the numbers. Marcus initially assumed it was some kind of elaborate spam or perhaps a new form of online scam. But the follow-up messages, complete with detailed travel arrangements and what appeared to be legitimate government documents, gradually convinced him that this was either the most sophisticated fraud in human history or an actual job offer from aliens. The deciding factor came when a sleek spacecraft landed in his backyard the next morning, drawing a crowd of neighbors and what seemed like half the local police force. The being that emerged from the ship was tall, graceful, and had silver skin that seemed to shimmer in the sunlight. She introduced herself as Ambassador Kellen and spoke perfect English, though with an accent that sounded like music. She explained that she represented the Zephyrian Empire and had come to escort Marcus to what she described as a challenging but well-compensated childcare position. "Mr. Chen," Ambassador Kellen said, her voice carrying an odd harmonious quality that made it impossible not to listen, "I want to be completely honest with you about what this position entails. The children you would be caring for are unusual. They possess abilities that make them difficult to manage using conventional methods." Marcus looked back at his house, where his own 3 children were pressed against the window, staring at the alien visitor with wide eyes. "What kind of abilities?" "Psychic powers, primarily. telekinesis, energy projection, limited reality manipulation. They're very young and have no control over these abilities yet. Reality manipulation, Marcus repeated slowly. Like what, exactly? Ambassador Kellen gestured toward a small garden gnome sitting near Marcus's flower bed. As they watched, the gnome suddenly lifted into the air, spun in a complete circle, and gently settled back into place. Similar to that, but significantly more powerful and completely unpredictable. Marcus considered this for a moment. How powerful! The last incident resulted in the complete destruction of an entire wing of the Imperial Palace. The one before that caused a citywide power outage. And, yesterday, they somehow created a localized gravitational anomaly that caused all the furniture in their room to stick to the ceiling for 6 hours. Any reasonable person would have said no immediately. Any sane individual would have politely declined and closed the door. But Marcus Chen was a single father who had spent the last 2 years dealing with the impossible on a daily basis. He had learned that sometimes the most challenging situations required the most unconventional solutions. What happened to the previous caregivers, he asked. 27 resignations in the past month. Most cited stress-related health issues, though several mentioned experiencing what they described as psychic trauma. One required treatment for what appeared to be temporary memory loss. Marcus nodded thoughtfully. And, you came to Earth because? Because every other option has been exhausted, Ambassador Kellen admitted. The Empress is desperate, Mr. Chen. These children are the heirs to one of the most powerful empires in the galaxy, but, if their abilities continue to grow unchecked, they could pose a threat to planetary stability. Planetary stability, Marcus mused. That does sound serious. It is. Which is why the compensation is so generous, and why we've included comprehensive life insurance in the benefits package. That evening, Marcus sat his own children down for what he privately thought of as the most surreal conversation of my life. He explained that he had been offered a job taking care of some very special children who lived far away, and that it would mean traveling to space for a while. Emma, who was 3 and had recently become obsessed with astronauts, immediately declared this the best thing ever and asked if she could come along to help with the space babies. Jake wanted to know if the aliens had laser guns and whether Marcus would be allowed to bring some home. Lisa, always the practical one, asked the question that Marcus had been dreading: how far away, and for how long? I don't know yet, Marcus admitted. But, your grandparents will take care of you while I'm gone, and I'll try to come back as soon as possible. The next 3 days were a whirlwind of arrangements. Marcus had to explain to his boss that he was taking an extended leave of absence for what he described as an urgent family matter involving distant relatives. He had to convince his parents to move in and care for his children, which required an explanation that was equal parts truth and creative fiction. And he had to pack for what Ambassador Kellen described as an assignment of undetermined duration in a potentially hazardous environment. The journey to the Zephyrian homeworld took 12 hours in what Ambassador Kellen called a standard diplomatic transport. To Marcus, the ship seemed like something out of a science fiction movie, complete with artificial gravity, holographic displays, and a view of space that left him speechless for the first hour of the trip. Mr. Chen, Ambassador Kellen said as they entered what she called the Zephyria system, I should prepare you for what you're about to encounter. The Imperial Palace is not in its usual condition. Through the ship's viewing port, Marcus could see a planet that looked like a massive jewel floating in space. The continents were covered in what appeared to be crystal cities that sparkled in the light of the system's twin suns. But, as they drew closer, he began to notice that parts of the largest cities seemed to be damaged, with dark areas where the crystalline structures had been reduced to rubble. The twins did all that? Marcus asked. Over the past 6 months, yes. The damage has been increasing in both frequency and severity. The latest reports indicate that their abilities are growing stronger each day. The palace itself was even more impressive and more damaged than Marcus had expected. It was a massive structure that seemed to be built entirely of some kind of transparent crystal, rising from the center of the capital city like a mountain of frozen light. But entire sections of the building were either missing or clearly under reconstruction, and Marcus could see what looked like energy barriers surrounding certain areas. Those barriers, Ambassador Kellen explained, are to contain the twins' abilities when they have what the palace staff calls episodes. The barriers are composed of condensed energy fields that can withstand approximately the equivalent of a small nuclear explosion. And, you want me to go inside those barriers, Marcus said. Yes. With no protection other than whatever experience I have with difficult children. Correct. Marcus looked out at the damaged palace, then thought about his own 3 children back on Earth. Emma with her flood-making tendencies, Jake with his creative interpretation of safety rules, and Lisa with her natural talent for organized rebellion. Well, he said finally, I've handled worse. Ambassador Kellen looked at him with what might have been surprise. You have? You'd be amazed what 3 human children can accomplish when they put their minds to it, Marcus replied. Though I admit, they've never actually destroyed any buildings. The landing platform was busy with what appeared to be evacuation efforts. Marcus saw ships loading with passengers and cargo, while palace staff moved with the urgent efficiency of people trying to get important things to safety before the next disaster struck. Empress Lyralii was waiting for them in what remained of the palace's main reception hall. She was tall and elegant, with silver skin that seemed to glow with inner light, but Marcus could see the stress in her posture and the exhaustion in her eyes. This was a mother at the end of her rope. Mr. Chen, she said, her voice carrying the same musical quality as Ambassador Kellen's, thank you for coming. I realize this situation must seem unusual to someone from your world. Your Majesty, Marcus replied, offering what he hoped was an appropriate bow, I appreciate the opportunity. Though I have to admit, I'm not entirely sure what I can do that your previous caregivers couldn't. To be honest, neither am I, the Empress admitted. But, traditional approaches have failed completely. Perhaps what we need is someone with a completely different perspective. As if summoned by their conversation, a distant rumble echoed through the palace, followed by what sounded like children's laughter. The lights flickered, and Marcus felt a strange tingling sensation, like the feeling of static electricity before a thunderstorm. Are they awake? Empress Lyralii asked one of the nearby guards. Yes, Your Majesty. They've been active for approximately 20 minutes. The energy readings are climbing steadily. Mr. Chen, the Empress said, turning to Marcus with an expression that mixed hope and desperation, would you like to meet your new charges? As they walked through the damaged corridors toward what remained of the nursery, Marcus tried to prepare himself for whatever he was about to encounter. But nothing, he realized, could really prepare someone for the sight of 2 18-month-old children sitting in the center of what looked like a bomb crater, surrounded by floating toys and furniture, giggling as sparks of energy danced between their fingers. Princess Vera and Princess Kira looked like perfectly normal toddlers, except for the silver skin they shared with their mother and the fact that they were currently defying several laws of physics. As Marcus watched, one of the twins clapped her hands and a stuffed animal materialized out of thin air, while the other seemed to be having a conversation with what appeared to be a small ball of living light. Girls, Empress Lyralii called softly, there's someone here to meet you. Both twins turned toward the group of adults standing at the edge of what had once been a nursery. Their large, dark eyes fixed on Marcus with an intensity that was surprisingly unsettling. For a moment, he felt something probing at the edges of his mind, like invisible fingers trying to read his thoughts. Then, Princess Vera smiled, raised one small hand, and Marcus felt himself being gently lifted 6 inches off the ground. Well, he said calmly, hanging in midair while the Empress and her guards stared in shock, this is definitely going to be interesting. Marcus Chun found himself floating 3 feet above the ground, held aloft by the telekinetic abilities of an 18-month-old alien princess, while a dozen of the galaxy's most elite guards stared at him in horror. Most people would have panicked. Marcus simply looked down at Princess Vera and said, "That's very impressive, sweetheart, but could you put me down, please? I'd like to come say hello properly." What happened next surprised everyone in the room except Marcus. Instead of increasing her psychic grip or throwing him across the room as had happened with previous caregivers, Princess Vera tilted her head curiously and gently lowered him back to the ground. The moment his feet touched the floor, both twins began babbling excitedly in what sounded like a mixture of Zephyrian and something else entirely. "They're trying to communicate with you," Empress Lyralii said, her voice filled with wonder. "They haven't attempted to speak with anyone since their father died. Marcus crouched down to the twins' eye level, moving slowly and keeping his hands visible. It was the same approach he used with his own children when they were upset or scared. "Hello, Princess Vera. Hello, Princess Kara. I'm Marcus. I'm here to take care of you." Princess Kara, who had been making the ball of light dance around her fingers, suddenly pointed at Marcus and said something in rapid Zephyrian. The ball of light zipped over and began circling Marcus's head like a curious firefly. "She's asking if you're the new daddy," one of the guards translated, his voice filled with shock. "She hasn't spoken a complete sentence in months." Marcus felt his heart twist at the simple question. These children weren't monsters or weapons, they were babies who missed their father and didn't understand why he wasn't coming home. "No, sweetheart," he said gently. "I'm not your daddy. But I'm here to be your friend and to take care of you while your mommy is busy being an empress." The twins exchanged a look that seemed far too mature for their age, and Marcus felt that probing sensation in his mind again. But this time, instead of trying to block it, he did something that surprised everyone, including himself. He opened his thoughts and let them see exactly what he was thinking. He thought about his own children, about the games they played and the stories he told them at bedtime. He thought about the time Emma had been scared of thunderstorms and how he'd taught her that thunder was just the sky saying hello in a very loud voice. He thought about Jake's determination to build a fort in the backyard and how they'd spent an entire weekend creating an elaborate structure out of cardboard boxes and duct tape. He thought about Lisa's fierce protectiveness of her younger siblings and how proud he was of her leadership qualities. Most importantly, he thought about love, the patient, steady, unconditional love that parents feel for their children even when those children are having their worst days. The effect was immediate and dramatic. Both twins stopped their various displays of power and simply stared at Marcus with wide eyes. The floating furniture settled gently to the ground. The energy sparks faded away. For the first time in months, the nursery was completely quiet. Then, Princess Vera took a tentative step toward Marcus, and Princess Kara followed suit. Without breaking eye contact, both children moved closer until they were within arm's reach. They stood there for a moment, studying this strange alien who had somehow shared his thoughts with them, and then, simultaneously reached out their small hands. Marcus gently took their hands in his, and immediately understood why the previous caregivers had fled in terror. The twins' skin buzzed with energy that felt like touching a live electrical wire, but instead of pulling away, Marcus simply squeezed their hands gently and smiled. "There you are," he said softly. "I was wondering when I'd get to actually meet you." Empress Lyralii watched in amazement as her daughters, for the first time since their father's death, allowed a stranger to touch them without unleashing a psychic attack that would level half the palace. "How did you do that?" she whispered. "I didn't do anything special," Marcus replied, still holding the twins' hands. "I just let them know that I'm not here to change them or fix them or make them be something they're not. I'm just here to help them figure out how to be themselves safely." Over the next several hours, Marcus began to understand the scope of the challenge he was facing. The twins weren't just powerful, they were operating on a completely different level of reality than most beings in the galaxy. Their abilities seemed to be tied directly to their emotional state, which meant that traditional discipline and structure were not only useless but potentially dangerous. When Princess Vera became frustrated because she couldn't make a toy work the way she wanted, the toy didn't just break, it disintegrated at the molecular level, taking part of the floor with it. When Princess Kara was happy, flowers began blooming spontaneously from the crystalline walls. When they were both excited, the local gravity became negotiable and everything in a 20-foot radius began floating. But Marcus also began to see patterns that others had missed. The twins' powers weren't random or chaotic, they were responsive and purposeful, even if that purpose wasn't always clear to adult observers. They were trying to communicate, to interact with their environment, to make sense of a world that seemed to have suddenly become alien to them. "They're not out of control," Marcus explained to Empress Lyralii during a brief break while the twins napped. "They're trying to control everything because they feel like they have no control over the important things. Their father is gone, their mother is busy running an empire, and everyone who tries to take care of them runs away screaming. So they're using their abilities to create a world where they feel safe." The Empress considered this. But, the destruction, the danger to the palace and the city. Is their way of expressing feelings they don't have words for yet, Marcus finished. Think about it, when a human child is upset, they might throw a toy or have a tantrum. When your daughters are upset, buildings explode. It's the same emotional response, just with different consequences. That afternoon, Marcus tried something that no previous caregiver had attempted. He gave the twins choices. Instead of trying to contain their abilities or distract them from using their powers, he worked with them to find safe ways to express what they were feeling. When Princess Vera became frustrated with a puzzle, instead of trying to prevent her from using her telekinesis, Marcus brought her a collection of objects that were safe to disintegrate: old toys, broken equipment, things that needed to be disposed of anyway. If you need to make things disappear, he told her, these are okay to practice on. When Princess Kara wanted to make things float, Marcus cleared an area and provided her with soft, lightweight objects that wouldn't cause damage if they fell. You can make these fly, he said, but let's keep the heavy furniture on the ground for now. The results were remarkable. Within hours, the twins had gone from destructive outbursts to focused practice. They were still using their abilities constantly, but now those abilities were directed rather than random. The palace stopped shaking. The emergency alarms stopped going off every few minutes. And, for the first time in months, the twins seemed genuinely happy. It's like they were waiting for someone to give them permission to be powerful, Captain Zara observed, watching through the monitoring screens as Princess Kara carefully levitated a series of colorful balls in an increasingly complex pattern. No, Marcus corrected. They were waiting for someone to teach them that being powerful doesn't mean they have to be dangerous. By evening, Marcus had managed something that the combined efforts of dozens of specialists had failed to achieve. Both twins had eaten a full meal without causing a single disturbance, had played together cooperatively for over an hour, and were now sitting quietly while he read them a story from a book he'd brought from Earth. The story was The Very Hungry Caterpillar, which Marcus had chosen because it was simple, colorful, and dealt with transformation, something he thought the twins might relate to. But, as he read, he began to realize that they were understanding far more than just the basic plot. When he reached the part where the caterpillar builds its cocoon, Princess Vera pointed at the illustration and said something in Zephyrian. One of the guards translated, "She says the caterpillar is learning to control his changing." When the butterfly emerged at the end, Princess Kara clapped her hands and created a small, perfect holographic butterfly that fluttered around the room before settling on Marcus's shoulder. "She's showing that she understands," the guard translated unnecessarily. As Marcus tucked the twins into their beds, actual beds, for the first time in weeks, rather than the reinforced containment units that previous caregivers had deemed necessary, Princess Vera looked up at him with her large, dark eyes and asked a question in perfect, if halting, English. "Marcus, you stay? You not go away?" The question hit Marcus harder than any psychic attack could have. These children weren't weapons or problems to be solved. They were babies who had lost their father and were terrified of losing anyone else who showed them kindness. "I'll stay as long as you need me to," he promised. "And, even when I have to go back to my own children eventually, I'll make sure you have someone who understands you." Princess Kara, not to be outdone by her sister's linguistic achievement, managed her own English phrase, "Good night, Marcus daddy friend." As the twins settled into sleep, the palace experienced something it hadn't known for months: complete peace. No alarms, no structural damage, no emergency meetings. Just the quiet breathing of two children who finally felt safe enough to rest. Outside the nursery, Empress Lyralii stood with tears in her eyes. In one day, she whispered to Marcus, "You've accomplished what the best minds in the galaxy couldn't do in months." "How?" Marcus looked back at the sleeping twins, then at their mother. "I treated them like children instead of problems," he said simply. Everything else followed from there. But, even as he spoke, Marcus knew that this was only the beginning. The twins were powerful beyond anything he'd ever encountered, and their abilities were still growing. What they'd accomplished today was just the first step in what would be a much longer journey. And, somewhere in the depths of the palace, forces were already moving to ensure the journey would not be an easy one. Marcus had been caring for the twins for 2 weeks when the first assassination attempt occurred. He was in the middle of teaching Princess Vera and Princess Kara a simple Earth children's song when every alarm in the palace began screaming at once. The twins, who had grown remarkably calm under Marcus's care, immediately became agitated, their powers flaring in response to the sudden chaos.
"What's happening?"
Marcus asked Captain Zara as she burst into the nursery with a full squad of guards.
"Security breach in the East Wing," she reported tersely. "Unknown infiltrators with advanced cloaking technology. Your Majesty has ordered immediate lockdown protocols."
As the guards moved to surround the twins, Marcus noticed something that others missed. Princess Vera and Princess Kara weren't just scared by the alarms, they were reacting to something else, something that was making their abilities spike unpredictably.
"Wait," Marcus said, holding up his hand. "Something's wrong here. The twins aren't just frightened, they're detecting something that your sensors aren't picking up."
"Mr. Chen, with respect, this is a security matter," Captain Zara replied.
"We need to move the princesses to the secure bunker immediately."
But Marcus was watching the twins carefully. Both children were staring at the same spot on the seemingly empty wall, their eyes tracking something invisible to everyone else. Princess Kara pointed at the wall and said something urgent in Zephyrian.
"She says bad shadows are moving," one of the guards translated.
Before anyone could react, the empty wall erupted in energy weapons fire. What had appeared to be solid crystal was actually some kind of advanced camouflage technology, and behind it were 6 figures in stealth armor firing weapons designed to kill Zephyrian royalty. The guards responded instantly, but the assassins had the advantage of surprise and superior technology. In the chaos of the firefight, one of the attackers broke through the defensive line and aimed directly at the twins.
What happened next would be talked about in military academies for generations.
Princess Vera, an 18-month-old child, saw the threat to her sister and responded with power that shouldn't have been possible for someone her age. The assassin's weapon simply ceased to exist, not destroyed, not broken, but erased from reality as if it had never been manufactured. The assassin himself was lifted into the air and held there, suspended by forces that made the local gravity meters spin wildly. Princess Kara, meanwhile, created what could only be described as a localized time distortion around the remaining attackers. They found themselves moving in slow motion while the defenders moved at normal speed, making them easy targets for the palace guards. Within minutes, the threat was neutralized, but the implications of what had just occurred were staggering. They coordinated their abilities, Captain Zara said in amazement. Not just used them simultaneously, but actually coordinated them for maximum tactical effectiveness. That shouldn't be possible for anyone under 10 years old, let alone toddlers. Marcus, however, was focused on the twins themselves. Both children were shaking, overwhelmed by the violence they had witnessed and the power they had unleashed. Princess Vera was crying, and Princess Kara was making distressed sounds that were causing the remaining intact windows to vibrate ominously.
"Everyone out," Marcus said firmly. "Give us some space."
"Mr. Chen, the security protocols, the biggest threat to security right now is 2 traumatized children with reality-altering abilities," Marcus interrupted.
"Let me calm them down before they accidentally create a black hole in the middle of the palace."
Once the room was cleared, Marcus sat on the floor and opened his arms. Both twins immediately ran to him, burying their faces against his chest while their powers continued to fluctuate wildly. For several minutes, Marcus just held them, letting them feel safe while carefully projecting thoughts of calm and security.
"It's okay," he murmured. "You protected your family. You did exactly what you needed to do. But it's over now, and you're safe."
Gradually, the energy discharges faded and the localized reality distortions stabilized. The twins' breathing slowed to normal, and the dangerous spikes in their power levels returned to what had become their new baseline. But Marcus knew that this incident had changed everything. The twins had just demonstrated military-level capabilities while defending themselves and their loved ones. Word of this would spread, and it would not be long before various factions tried to either eliminate the twins as threats or claim them as weapons. His suspicions were confirmed the next morning when Councillor Thane arrived with what he described as urgent communications from concerned parties.
"The Galactic Council has received reports about yesterday's incident," Thane explained nervously.
"There are questions being raised about the wisdom of allowing such powerful beings to develop without proper oversight." "Proper oversight," Marcus repeated flatly.
"Meaning what, exactly?"
There's talk of establishing a special facility where the princesses could be studied and trained by experts in psychic development. Somewhere away from populated areas, where they could learn to control their abilities without risking civilian casualties. Empress Lyralii, who had been unusually quiet during this conversation, finally spoke. They want to take my daughters away and turn them into weapons. Your Majesty, the Council's concerns are legitimate, Thane said carefully. The princess's abilities appear to be growing exponentially. Yesterday they demonstrated tactical coordination that surpassed anything our military analysts thought was possible. If their development continues unchecked, Marcus interrupted, they'll become exactly what you're all afraid of. But, not because they're inherently dangerous, because everyone keeps treating them like they are. Mr. Chen, surely you understand the implications of what happened yesterday, Thane continued. These children have the power to alter reality. In the hands of an 18-month-old, such abilities could accidentally destroy star systems. Or save them, Marcus countered. The twins didn't attack randomly yesterday. They defended their family with surgical precision. They eliminated threats without harming any of the defenders. That's not the behavior of out-of-control weapons, that's the behavior of children who understand the difference between protecting and destroying. Over the following days, the pressure on the royal family intensified. Delegations arrived from various galactic powers, all expressing concern about the twins' development. The Corvani Federation offered to provide specialized education facilities on a remote planet. The Zemthari Collective suggested that the twins would benefit from meditative isolation in their monastery worlds. The Human Colonial Authority, newly admitted to galactic society, even sent a representative offering to take the twins to Earth where they could be studied and contained safely. Each offer was politely declined, but Marcus could see the strain wearing on Empress Lyralii. The responsibility of protecting her daughters while maintaining diplomatic relations with the galaxy's major powers was taking its toll. The situation reached a crisis point when Princess Lyralii's sister, Princess Valera, arrived at the palace with what she claimed was a compromise solution. Sister, Valera said during a formal court session, I understand your maternal instincts, but we must consider the greater good. The twins are too powerful to be raised in a normal environment. But, rather than sending them away to alien institutions, why not establish a specialized facility here on Zephyria? We could create a controlled environment where they could develop their abilities safely while remaining under family supervision. Marcus, who had been observing this conversation from the side of the throne room, felt his suspicions confirmed when he noticed the twins' reaction to their aunt. Both children, who normally ran freely around the palace, stayed close to him whenever Princess Valera was present. More tellingly, their abilities became unstable in her presence, not from anger or fear, but from what seemed to be a natural defensive response. Your proposal has merit, Empress Lyralii replied carefully, but I'm not convinced that isolation is the answer. Marcus has made remarkable progress with the twins using conventional childcare techniques adapted to their unique needs. Princess Valera's gaze turned to Marcus, and he felt something probing at the edges of his mind, not the gentle, curious touch of the twins, but something sharp and invasive. Yes, the human has been surprisingly effective. But surely you don't believe that alien childcare methods are sufficient for beings of such power? I believe, Empress Lyralii said firmly, that my daughters need love, guidance, and patience, not confinement and study. That night, Marcus was awakened by a soft knock on his door. He opened it to find Princess Kara standing in the hallway, still in her pajamas, holding her sister's hand. Both twins looked frightened. Bad aunt, Princess Vera said in her carefully practiced English. She wants to take us away. How do you know that? Marcus asked, though he suspected he already knew the answer. She thinks loud, Princess Kara explained. She thinks about places with walls and people who want to make us into tools. Marcus knelt down to their level. Do you want to go to these places? Both twins shook their heads vigorously. Then, you won't, Marcus promised. But, we need to be smart about how we handle this. Your aunt isn't the only one who wants to separate you from your mother. There are people all over the galaxy who see you as either threats or weapons. What do we do? Princess Vera asked.
Marcus smiled at the question.
Not because the situation was amusing, but because it showed how much the twins had grown in their ability to think beyond their immediate emotional responses.
We show them what you really are, he said.
Not weapons or threats, but children who want to help and protect the people they love.
And we make sure that everyone understands that trying to take you away from your family would be the worst mistake they could possibly make.
The twins exchanged one of their mysterious looks, and Marcus felt their combined mental presence brush against his thoughts. They weren't just accepting his plan, they were adding to it, contributing ideas and perspectives that were far more sophisticated than anyone would expect from toddlers. By the time they returned to their beds, Marcus realized that the twins weren't just developing their psychic abilities. They were developing strategically, learning to think several steps ahead and coordinate their actions for maximum effect. The galactic powers trying to control them had no idea what they were truly dealing with. And Marcus intended to keep it that way until the twins were ready to reveal their full capabilities on their own terms. The final confrontation came exactly 1 month after Marcus's arrival on Zephyria. Princess Valera had returned with representatives from the Galactic Council, armed with legal documents that would effectively remove Princess Vera and Princess Kara from their mother's custody and place them in what was euphemistically called protective developmental supervision. Marcus stood in the throne room beside Empress Lyralii, watching as a dozen of the galaxy's most powerful beings prepared to take away 2 children who had just learned to walk steadily. The twins sat on their mother's lap, unusually quiet, their large eyes taking in everything with an intelligence that none of the council members seemed to notice. Empress Lyralii, announced Council Representative Theron, a tall being with blue-scaled skin and cold silver eyes, the evidence is overwhelming.
Your daughters pose an unprecedented threat to galactic stability. The incident 3 weeks ago, where they demonstrated coordinated military-level psychic abilities, cannot be ignored.
They were defending themselves and their family, Empress Lyralii replied, her voice steady despite the obvious strain.
Any parent would want their children to be able to protect themselves. These are not ordinary children, Representative Theron continued. They are weapons of mass destruction in the bodies of toddlers.
The council has voted unanimously, they must be contained and trained by specialists before they accidentally destroy inhabited worlds. Princess Valera stepped forward, her expression a perfect mask of concern.
Sister, please be reasonable.
The council is offering to establish the containment facility here on Zephyria, under your nominal oversight. The twins would be safe, and the galaxy would be protected. Marcus felt the twins' mental presence brush against his thoughts, and what he sensed made him smile despite the gravity of the situation. They weren't afraid, they were curious. These powerful beings were discussing their fate as if they were objects, and the twins wanted to know if this was how all adults behaved when they thought children weren't listening.
Representative Theron, Marcus said, stepping forward, before you make any final decisions, might I suggest a demonstration?
A demonstration of what? The council representative asked suspiciously. Of what Princess Vera and Princess Kara are actually capable of when they choose to be, Marcus replied.
I think you might be surprised.
Empress Lyralii looked at Marcus uncertainly, but he gave her a reassuring nod. Over the past month, he had learned to trust the twins' judgment completely, and right now they were practically humming with anticipation.
Very well, Representative Theron said dismissively. Show us these children at their best.
Perhaps it will help us design better containment protocols. Marcus knelt down beside the twins and spoke quietly to them.
Would you like to show these people what you can really do? Both children nodded eagerly.
Remember, Marcus continued, the goal isn't to scare them or hurt them.
The goal is to help them understand.
We understand, Marcus' daddy friend, Princess Vera said clearly, her English now nearly perfect despite having learned it only 4 weeks ago. We show them truth, Princess Kara added, her small hand reaching up to pat Marcus's cheek.
They think we are broken. We show them we are not. What happened next would be discussed in xenological circles for centuries to come.
Princess Vera stood up on her mother's lap and looked directly at Representative Theron. For a moment, nothing visible occurred, but every psychic sensitive being in the room suddenly straightened as they felt something profound touching their minds. The twins weren't just demonstrating their abilities, they were sharing their memories and thoughts directly with everyone present. Council members who had expected to see displays of destructive power instead found themselves experiencing the world through the eyes of 18-month-old children. They felt the twins' grief when their father died, the confusion when caregiver after caregiver fled in terror, the loneliness of being treated as threats rather than children. But they also felt the joy when Marcus arrived, the relief of finally having someone who saw them as individuals worthy of love rather than problems to be solved. More importantly, they experienced the twins' true abilities, not just the raw power that had frightened so many, but the incredible precision and control that came with it. The twins could indeed level cities if they chose to, but they could also perform molecular-level healing, create complex energy patterns that enhanced rather than destroyed, and manipulate reality in ways that could solve problems rather than cause them. The demonstration lasted only minutes, but when it was over, every being in the throne room was staring at the twins with expressions of wonder rather than fear. "Impossible," Representative Theron whispered. "Children that young shouldn't have such sophisticated control over their mental sharing abilities." The level of coordination required. The level of coordination required, Marcus said calmly, comes from treating them like the intelligent beings they are rather than like dangerous animals that need to be caged. Princess Vera slid down from her mother's lap and walked over to Representative Theron. The tall alien looked down at her nervously, but, instead of unleashing psychic devastation, the toddler simply held up her hand. "Friend," she asked in the council representative's own language. Hesitantly, Representative Theron reached down and took the small hand in his much larger one. The moment their skin touched, his entire expression changed. "She's showing me solutions," he said in amazement. "Problems we've been struggling with for years, she's showing me how her abilities could solve them rather than cause them. Stellar engineering projects that seemed impossible, terraforming techniques that could create habitable worlds in decades rather than centuries." Princess Kara, not to be outdone, walked over to another council member and repeated her sister's gesture. Within moments, that representative was also staring at the child with amazement. "They're not weapons," Marcus said quietly. "They're the next step in galactic evolution. They're what we all might become if we learn to develop power alongside wisdom rather than trying to control one through fear." One by one, each member of the Galactic Council delegation experienced direct mental contact with the twins. And, one by one, their expressions changed from fear and suspicion to wonder and hope. Princess Valera, however, remained unmoved. "Sister," she said sharply, "you cannot seriously believe that a few pretty demonstrations change the fundamental danger these children represent. They are still toddlers with godlike powers. What happens when they have a tantrum? What happens when they disagree with each other? What happens when they reach adolescence and begin to rebel? Then, they'll have the foundation of love and guidance they need to handle those challenges responsibly," Empress Lyralii replied. "Just like any other children." "Just like any other children?" Princess Valera laughed harshly. "Sister, they could accidentally tear holes in spacetime when they get frustrated about bedtime." "Could they?" Marcus asked mildly. "Princess Vera, Princess Kara, could you please show your aunt what happens when you get frustrated?" Both twins looked at each other and giggled. Then, Princess Vera scrunched up her face in an exaggerated expression of frustration while Princess Kara crossed her arms and pouted dramatically. Nothing happened. No energy discharges, no floating furniture, no reality distortions. Just two children pretending to be upset while carefully maintaining complete control over their abilities. "They've learned to separate their emotions from their power usage," Marcus explained. "It took about 3 weeks of consistent guidance. The same amount of time it takes most human children to learn not to hit when they're angry." "But surely when they're truly upset," Princess Valera began. "When they're truly upset, they do exactly what they did a few weeks ago when the palace was attacked," Marcus interrupted. "They defend themselves and their loved ones with precise, controlled applications of their abilities. They don't lash out randomly, they respond appropriately to actual threats." Representative Theron, who had been deep in conversation with Princess Vera, suddenly looked up with an expression of shock. "Empress Lyralii, your daughter just explained to me how her abilities work. Not in children's language, but in terms that our best scientists would find sophisticated. They understand far more than anyone has given them credit for," Marcus confirmed. they understand the responsibility that comes with their power.
They understand the fear that others feel. And they understand that they have a choice in how they develop their abilities. What choice? Princess Valera demanded.
Princess Kara walked over to her aunt and looked up at her with solemn eyes.
Choose to help, she said clearly. Choose to heal. Choose to make things better instead of broken. And what if you choose wrong? Princess Valera asked.
Then, Marcus Daddy Friend will help us choose better next time, Princess Vera replied simply.
That is what good parents do. The simplicity of that statement hit everyone in the room like a physical blow.
These children with godlike powers weren't asking for special treatment or unlimited freedom. They were asking for what every child needed: consistent guidance, unconditional love, and the chance to learn from their mistakes in a safe environment. Representative Theron stood up slowly, his entire demeanor changed.
The council's position has been hasty, he said formally.
These children clearly do not require containment. They require exactly what they are receiving: careful, consistent education that respects both their unique abilities and their fundamental nature as developing beings.
One by one, the other council representatives voiced their agreement.
The documents authorizing the twins' removal were formally withdrawn, and new agreements were drafted establishing the Zephyrian Palace as a protected educational environment.
Princess Valera, however, was not finished.
You are all making a mistake that will destroy the galaxy, she said coldly. Mark my words, these children will become the very weapons you fear, and it will be because you chose sentiment over security.
Princess Vera walked over to her aunt one final time.
This time, instead of offering her hand, she simply looked up at the woman who had tried to have her taken away. Aunt Valera, she said in perfect Zephyrian, we forgive you for being scared.
But we will not let you hurt our family anymore.
The dismissal was gentle but absolute. Princess Valera found herself surrounded by a subtle energy field that gently but firmly escorted her from the throne room and out of the palace entirely. As the formal session ended and the various representatives began making their farewells, Marcus felt a small hand slip into his.
Princess Kara looked up at him with an expression that was far too mature for her age. We did good, she asked.
You did perfectly, Marcus assured her.
You showed everyone exactly who you really are. And who are we, Marcus Daddy Friend?
Princess Vera asked, taking his other hand. Marcus looked down at the two small beings who had single-handedly revolutionized galactic politics and child development theory in the space of a few hours.
You're exactly what you've always been, he said.
You're children who happen to be extraordinarily gifted. And, with the right guidance and enough love, you're going to grow up to be extraordinary people. That evening, as Marcus tucked the twins into their beds that were now in a beautiful nursery rather than a reinforced containment facility, Princess Vera asked one final question.
Marcus Daddy Friend, when will you go back to your own children?
The question he'd been dreading had finally come, but Marcus had prepared for it.
Soon, he admitted.
But not until I'm sure you have someone who understands you as well as I do.
Will we see you again? Princess Kara asked. Absolutely, Marcus promised.
And, when you're old enough, maybe you can come visit Earth and meet Emma, Jake, and Lisa. I think you'd all be great friends. As the twins settled into sleep, content and secure in their transformed world, Marcus reflected on the month that had changed everything.
He had come to Zephyria expecting to deal with difficult children.
Instead, he had discovered that the most powerful beings in the galaxy were also the most fundamentally innocent.
They didn't need to be contained or controlled.
They needed exactly what all children needed: love, guidance, and the chance to grow into the best versions of themselves. And, sometimes, Marcus realized, the most impossible situations had the simplest solutions. You just had to be brave enough to try treating powerful beings like the children they actually were.